Ash was small, even for a dragonling his age. Most young dragons his age had already grown their second set of scales, the harder, darker ones that came in after the first cold season. Ash still had his birth scales. Thin, pale, and soft at the edges. They caught the wind badly and held almost no heat. When the cold came down from the mountains at night, he felt every bit of it. He lived in what used to be a settlement. It was not much anymore. The storm had taken most of it. Collapsed the stone dens, snapped the old birch trees, scattered everything that was not buried or bolted down. Ash had searched every corner of the ruins in the weeks after the storm. He had called out until his throat hurt. He had waited at the valley entrance for days, watching the ridgeline, sure that someone would come back over it. No one did. The valley stayed quiet. The ruins stayed empty. And eventually Ash stopped watching the ridgeline and started learning how to survive in what was left. It was not easy. He was too small to take down prey larger than a ground bird, and ground birds were fast. He had caught 3 in the past 2 months, and each time it had taken most of his energy just to make the catch. He had found roots he could eat, and once a cache of dried grain left behind in a collapsed den, which had kept him going for nearly 2 weeks. But the cache was long gone now, and the roots were getting harder to find as the ground dried out. His wing was the other problem. It had not been injured in the storm, it had just never grown the way it should. The left one was slightly shorter than the right, with a kink near the upper joint that no amount of stretching seemed to fix. He could use it. He could glide short distances and manage slow, low flights close to the ground. But real flying, the kind where you caught a thermal and let it carry you up and out, was beyond him. He had tried enough times to know that. The kink pulled him left every time, and without the height and speed to correct it, he just curved back down to the ground. He had tried 3 times to find shelter with the other clans. The first clan lived 2 ridges east. They were a large group, well established, with deep stone dens and a steady hunting range. Ash had approached their outer boundary carefully, the way his mother had taught him, low to the ground, wings folded, no eye contact with the sentries. The sentry who stopped him was twice his size and looked at him the way someone looks at a problem they do not want to deal with. Ash had explained, in his best careful words, that he was alone and that his clan was gone. The sentry had looked him over slowly, his soft scales, his short wing, his thin frame, and told him to move on. The clan was not taking outsiders. Especially young ones with no bloodline record and no elder to speak for them. The second clan was smaller and lived closer to the tree line. Ash had hoped a smaller group might be more willing. They were not. The elder who came to speak with him was not unkind, but she was firm. They were already short on food going into the dry season. A young dragonling who could not hunt well and could not fly properly would cost them more than he could ever contribute. She told him she was sorry. She sounded like she meant it. It did not change the answer. The third clan turned him away without sending anyone to speak with him at all. After that, Ash stopped trying. He went back to the ruins and made the best of what was there. He found the most sheltered corner of what had been the main den, 3 walls still standing, with enough of the roof left to block the worst of the wind. He dragged in dry grass and old bark and made a rough sleeping spot in the corner. During the day he hunted what he could and searched for anything edible. At night he came back to the corner and curled as tight as he could and waited for morning. The nights were the hardest part. Not because of the cold, though the cold was bad enough. But because the ruins were full of sounds he recognized. The way the wind moved through the broken birch trees sounded like it used to sound when the adults were settling in for the night, that low, rustling quiet that meant everyone was home and everything was safe. Sometimes Ash would hear it and feel, just for a moment, like someone was about to come around the corner. Like his mother's voice was just on the other side of the collapsed wall. Then the moment would pass, and the ruins would just be ruins again, and the quiet would be the wrong kind of quiet. He did not cry. He had done enough of that in the first weeks. He just waited. Every night, curled in his corner with his soft scales doing their best against the cold, Ash waited for something to change. He did not know what that something was. He did not have a plan or a direction or even a clear hope. He just had the feeling, small and stubborn and refusing to go away, that the waiting was not finished yet. Then one night the sky opened up. Not with lightning. Not with another storm. With light, a steady, deliberate light that moved slowly through the clouds and grew brighter as it came lower, until the whole valley was lit up pale and blue and humming with a sound Ash had never heard before in his life. He lifted his head from his corner. His wings spread slightly without him meaning them to. He watched the light come down and settle into the far end of the valley with a long, low sound like the world exhaling. Ash did not run. He just watched, with wide eyes and a heart beating faster than it had in months, as the light held steady in the dark. Cara had landed in harder places than this. She had set down on a volcanic shelf with active vents 3 meters from her landing gear. She had once anchored her ship to the side of a cliff face during a wind event that would have grounded most other pilots. She was not someone who got rattled easily, and she was not someone who made mistakes on approach. But this valley gave her a strange feeling the moment she cleared the cloud cover and saw it below her, the broken stones, the dead settlement, the stillness of it. Like something had happened here not long ago and the land had not finished being sad about it yet. She pushed the feeling aside and focused on the landing. The ship settled cleanly on a flat stretch of valley floor near the eastern tree line, away from the ruins. Cara ran through her post-landing checks the way she always did, methodical, unhurried, one system at a time. Life support stable. External temperature cold but within suit tolerance. Atmosphere breathable with no contaminants. She pulled on her field jacket, clipped her sample kit to her belt, and picked up her scanner. 30 days. That was her window. She had a survey grid to complete, samples to collect, readings to log, and a report to file before the orbital station moved out of optimal retrieval range. She had done this 11 times before on 11 different worlds, and she had always come back on schedule with clean data and no complications. She stepped outside and felt the cold hit her face. The valley was quiet in a way that felt heavy. No wind at that moment, no bird sounds, nothing moving in the tree line. Just the low hum of her ship cooling behind her and the crunch of her boots on the dry ground. Cara checked her scanner and started walking her first grid line, sweeping the device slowly from side to side. The survey was straightforward work. She had always liked straightforward work. It kept her head clear and her notes clean. She was 40 minutes into her first sweep when the scanner picked up a heat signature. It was faint. Much fainter than it should have been for a creature of that estimated size. The scanner placed it about 20 meters ahead, between 2 large fallen stones near the edge of the ruins. Cara slowed her pace. Her orders were clear. Observe, do not interfere, do not make contact with native species. She had read those orders 3 times before departure and had not expected them to be difficult to follow. They had never been difficult before. She stopped 2 meters from the stones and looked. Ash was wedged in the narrow gap between them, folded into himself as tightly as he could manage. His scales were pale and dull, the color of old ash, with none of the faint sheen that healthy young dragons usually had. His breathing was shallow, she could see it, barely, in the tiny rise and fall of his sides. One wing was folded wrong, the upper joint sitting at an angle that looked like it had never quite healed correctly. He was small. Far too small for how exposed he was, in a gap that blocked some wind but held no real warmth, on a night that was still dropping in temperature. Cara stood there and looked at him for a long moment. She thought about her orders. She thought about the report she was supposed to file, the grid she was supposed to finish, the 11 previous missions where she had followed every rule without exception. She thought about the station council and what they would say if she deviated from protocol on day 1. Then she looked at Ash again. His eyes were closed. His small sides barely moved. The cold was sitting on him like a weight. Cara unclipped her field jacket and crouched down. She moved slowly and kept her movements small, in case he was more aware than he looked. She eased the jacket around him carefully, tucking it in at the sides without lifting him yet. He stirred slightly at the warmth. Just a small shift, a faint tightening of his folded legs, but he did not wake. Cara waited a moment, then slid one arm under him and lifted. He was lighter than she expected. That worried her more than anything else had so far. She carried him back to the ship. She told herself, very clearly, that this was a single-night decision. She would bring him in, get him warm, make sure he was stable, and then return him to the location she had found him. She was not taking him in. She was not making contact in any meaningful sense. She was simply preventing an unnecessary death that had fallen directly in front of her, and any reasonable person on the council would understand that, and in the morning everything would go back to the correct procedure. She told herself all of that very firmly. Inside the ship, she laid him on her spare thermal mat near the heat vent and adjusted the cabin temperature up 2 degrees. She ran her scanner over him slowly, no internal bleeding, no broken bones, the wing joint was old damage and not fresh, mild dehydration, significant heat loss but nothing irreversible. She exhaled. He was going to be all right. Cara sat back on her heels and looked at him properly for the first time in the light. He really was very small. His pale scales had a faint pattern to them up close, small overlapping shapes, almost like pressed leaves. His folded wings, even the bent one, had a careful structure to them. His face, even in sleep, had an expression that was harder to look away from than she expected. She got up, made herself a cup of hot ration tea, and sat down at her console to begin her first day's log. She did not mention Ash in the log. She told herself she would figure out what to write about that in the morning. Ash woke up on the second day. Not slowly, the way sick creatures usually did, groggy and confused and unsure of where they were. He woke up all at once, eyes open, head up, every part of him alert in an instant. Cara was at her console when it happened. She heard the shift of movement behind her and turned in her chair to find him sitting upright on the thermal mat, looking at her with eyes that were steady and clear and taking in everything at once. She held very still. He looked at her. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the walls, the console, the equipment racks along the far side of the cabin. He looked at the viewport and the pale morning light coming through it. Then he looked back at her. Cara said, very quietly, "Good morning." Ash did not move. But his eyes stayed on her face, and he did not look afraid. That was the first thing she noticed about him, he was not afraid. Cautious, yes. Careful, yes. He watched everything with the kind of attention that meant he was thinking about it, not just reacting to it. But there was no panic in him, no wild edge that would have made the next few hours dangerous for both of them. He simply sat on the thermal mat and looked at her and waited to see what she would do next. Cara decided the best thing she could do was act normal. She turned back to her console and kept working. She narrated quietly as she went. Not because she thought he understood, but because silence felt wrong with those eyes on the back of her head. She told him what she was logging, what the scanner readings meant, what the weather system moving in from the west was expected to do by afternoon. She kept her voice even and unhurried. After about 20 minutes she heard a small sound behind her, the soft scrape of claws on the floor, and then nothing. She did not turn around. A few minutes later she felt a presence beside her chair. Ash had moved from the thermal mat to a spot just to the left of her console, close enough that she could have reached out and touched him. He sat down there, folded his wings neatly, and looked at the console screen with the same careful attention he had given everything else. Cara kept working. By the end of that day he had moved 3 more times. Always quietly, always when she was not looking directly at him, always ending up a little closer than he had been before. The healing took time. Cara checked his wing joint every morning, pressing gently along the structure to see how the old damage was sitting. There was nothing she could do about the kink, it had set wrong long ago and was not something her kit could fix. But the rest of him responded well to warmth and food and rest. His scales began to change within the first week. The dullness faded slowly, and a faint sheen started coming back, the kind that meant the body underneath was doing better. He began holding his head higher. His movements became less careful, less like something that expected to be hurt. He started following her. Not underfoot, he seemed to understand without being told that certain parts of the ship were her workspaces and he should not crowd them. But wherever she went, he was nearby. When she moved to the equipment bay to run maintenance, he sat in the doorway and watched. When she went over her sample collection in the aft section, he found a spot on the raised storage shelf behind her and settled there like it was something he had always done. When she ate at the small table near the galley unit, he sat across from her and watched her eat with an expression she could not quite name. He was learning her. She could see it happening, the way his eyes tracked her hands when she worked, the way he noticed when her routine changed, the way he seemed to already know the sound of the console alerts and which ones made her stop what she was doing and which ones she ignored. He was filing everything away. She did not know what he was doing with it, but he was doing something. Cara started leaving the cabin light on a little longer in the evenings. She told herself it was because she had more work to finish. She did not examine that reason very closely. On the 9th evening, she was going through her ration supply and found a pack of dried fruit she had been saving, a small treat she usually kept for the midpoint of a mission, when morale needed a small lift. She opened it, took a few pieces for herself and then, without fully deciding to, set a small pile of them on the table in front of Ash. He looked at them. He looked at her. He sniffed the fruit carefully, the way he did with anything new, thorough, unhurried, making up his own mind. Then he picked up one piece and ate it. His eyes went slightly wide. He ate a second piece more quickly. Cara smiled and looked back down at her own food. When she looked up again, Ash had arranged the remaining pieces into 2 equal piles. He pushed one pile carefully across the table toward her side. Cara looked at the pile. She looked at him. He was watching her with that steady, waiting expression, and there was something in it, something deliberate and clear, that made her chest feel strange and tight in a way she did not have a word for immediately. She picked up a piece from her side and ate it. Ash looked satisfied. He ate one from his side. They finished the rest in silence, taking turns without discussing it, like it was something they had always done. That night Cara opened her mission log and sat in front of it for a long time. Then she closed it without writing anything, went to her bunk, and did not check how many days she had left in her window. She had stopped counting. The recall order came on a Tuesday. Cara knew it was coming. She had always known it was coming. The mission window was fixed, the orbital station's retrieval path did not change for anyone, and she had filed enough of these surveys to know exactly how the timeline worked. She had the date marked in her system from the moment she landed. She had looked at it every few days, the way you look at something you are aware of but not quite ready to think about directly. When the alert came through, she was running a soil sample analysis in the aft section. The console chimed twice. The specific two-tone signal reserved for station communications, and she walked to the front of the ship and read the message standing up. Return to orbital station within 48 hours. Mission window closing. No extensions available under current retrieval schedule. Acknowledge receipt and confirm departure time. 48 hours. Cara stood at the console and read it twice. Then she set her scanner down on the desk very carefully and turned around. Ash was asleep by the heat vent. He had claimed that spot sometime in the second week, the way he had claimed everything else, quietly, gradually, without asking, as though he was simply recognizing something that had always been his. He was curled with his tail wrapped around himself, his repaired wing folded neatly against his side, his chin resting on the edge of the vent housing. His scales had their full sheen back now. He looked completely different from the pale, barely breathing creature she had found wedged between two cold stones. He looked healthy. He looked settled. He looked, in a way that made something ache quietly behind her ribs, like he felt safe. Cara sat down in her chair and looked at him for a long time. She was a scientist. She thought in data and evidence and clear conclusions. So she made herself think clearly now, without sentiment getting in the way, about what the actual situation was. The cold season in this region would begin in less than 2 weeks. She had the atmospheric data, she had collected it herself. Temperatures would drop hard and fast, well below what Ash's thin birth scales could manage. His wing limited his flight range, which meant he could not relocate to a warmer region the way a healthy dragon might. His hunting results had been poor before she arrived, and there was no reason to think they would improve under worse conditions. The other clans had already turned him away. There was no food cache waiting for him, no shelter better than 3 broken walls and old bark. The conclusion was not complicated. If she left him here, he would not survive the season. That was not sentiment. That was the data. Cara pulled up a blank document on her console. She had never written this kind of request before. No one in the survey division had, as far as she knew. There was no template for it, no standard form, no section in the mission protocol that covered bringing a native creature off-world. She was going to have to write it from the beginning, in plain language, and make it clear enough and honest enough that the council could not set it aside without genuinely reading it. She started writing. She did not start with Ash. She started with the data, the temperature projections, the seasonal shift timeline, the survey records of the settlement ruins and what they indicated about how recently the clan had been there. She wrote about Ash's physical condition on the night she found him, with the scanner readings attached. She wrote about his wing, the old damage, the flight limitation it created. She wrote about the 3 clan rejections and what that meant for his options. She built the picture carefully, fact by fact, the way she would build any scientific argument, not asking for sympathy, just laying out what was true. Then she wrote about what she had observed in the 3 weeks since. She wrote about his intelligence. The way he learned routines. The way he tracked cause and effect, noticed patterns, remembered things from one day to the next and applied them. She wrote about the divided fruit, because it was the clearest example she had, and because she was a scientist and it was the kind of data point that deserved to be in the record. She did not dress it up. She described exactly what happened, the 2 equal piles, the push across the table, the shared silence, and let it stand without comment. At the end she wrote her request. She was asking for provisional ward status for a native creature under her direct care and responsibility. She was asking to bring him aboard the orbital station on a temporary basis while a longer-term plan was assessed. She was aware this was outside standard protocol. She was aware there were risks the council would want to discuss. She was prepared to discuss them. She was not prepared to leave Ash in a valley that would kill him in 2 weeks because the paperwork for helping him did not exist yet. She did not write that last sentence. But she thought it very clearly while she was writing the sentence before it. She attached every relevant scan, every atmospheric reading, every piece of supporting data she had. She read the whole thing through twice, changed 3 words, and then sat with her hand over the send key for a moment. Ash shifted in his sleep by the heat vent. He made a small sound, not distress, just the sound of something deeply comfortable adjusting its position. His tail curled tighter. His breathing stayed slow and even. Cara pressed send. Then she got up, went to the galley unit, and made 2 cups of hot ration tea. She set one on her side of the small table and one on Ash's side, even though he was still asleep and would not drink it while it was hot. It just felt right to set it there. She sat down, wrapped both hands around her cup, and waited to see what the council would say. The first response from the council came 6 hours after Cara sent the request. It was not an answer. It was a list of questions. She had expected that. She sat down at her console with her second cup of tea of the morning and read through them carefully. Some were practical: what were the creature's dietary needs, what were the space requirements, what were the known behavioral risks. Some were procedural. What regulation covered this situation, what precedent existed, who would bear liability if something went wrong aboard the station. And some were the kind of questions that were not really questions at all, but a way of saying this is very unusual and we are not sure we want to say yes. Cara answered every single one. She took her time. She did not rush the answers or cut them short. She pulled her scanner data for the dietary questions, her observation logs for the behavioral ones, and for the procedural questions she cited the 3 closest existing regulations she could find and explained clearly why each one supported her request rather than contradicted it. For the questions that were really just discomfort dressed up as procedure, she answered the surface question calmly and thoroughly and did not acknowledge the discomfort underneath, because acknowledging it would have given it more weight than it deserved. She sent the responses and went back to waiting. Ash spent most of that day close to her. He seemed to sense that something was different, not wrong, exactly, but changed. He did not follow her around the ship the way he usually did. He stayed near the console area, in his spot beside her chair, and watched her face more than he usually watched the screen. Every time she looked over at him he was already looking at her. She did not know what he was reading in her expression, but whatever it was, he seemed to be taking it seriously. Late in the afternoon a second message came through. More questions. 3 council members had joined the review, and each of them had added their own concerns to the list. Cara read through all of it, made herself a fresh cup of tea, and started writing again. Outside the viewport the valley light was going golden and long. The ruins cast shadows she had gotten used to seeing every evening. In less than 48 hours she would be lifting off and those shadows would be gone, one way or another. She did not let herself think too hard about the one way or another part. The final message came through at the 19th hour. Cara was half asleep in her chair when the console chimed. She sat up, blinked, and opened the message. Ash lifted his head from beside her chair and watched her read. The vote had passed. Narrow margin, 4-3. Ash was granted provisional ward status, registered under Cara's full name and mission credentials. He was to be housed in her assigned quarters on the station. She was personally responsible for his care, his conduct, and any incidents arising from his presence. A full review would be conducted at 60 days to assess whether the arrangement could continue on a longer-term basis. The decision was provisional, conditional, and came with 6 pages of attached requirements she would need to meet before arrival. Cara read the whole thing twice. Then she put her face in her hands and sat very still for a moment. She felt Ash move before she heard him. He got up from his spot, walked the 2 steps to her chair, and pressed the top of his head very gently against her arm. He did not make a sound. He just leaned there, steady and warm, the way he had learned she sometimes needed without her ever telling him. Cara took a slow breath and lifted her head. She looked at him. He looked back at her with those calm, clear eyes that had been watching and learning and remembering everything since the second morning he woke up in her ship. She said, "We got it." He did not understand the words. But he understood her face, and whatever he read there made him settle back on his haunches with the expression she had come to recognize as satisfied. Cara started the departure checklist. The ship lifted off 2 hours before the window closed. Cara ran the ascent clean and smooth, the way she always did, and as the ship climbed through the lower atmosphere she kept her eyes on her instruments and her hands steady on the controls. She had a 6-page list of requirements to start working through. She had a 60-day review to prepare for. She had a council that had said yes by the narrowest possible margin and would be watching closely to see if they had made a mistake. She had a lot of work to do. From behind her she heard the small sound of claws on the floor, and then Ash was at the viewport. He pressed his nose against the glass and looked down. Cara watched him from her seat. She saw the moment the valley came into view below, the broken stones, the collapsed den walls, the dead perch trees, the flat stretch of ground where her ship had sat for nearly a month. She saw Ash go very still. His breath made a small fog circle on the cold glass. He watched the valley the way she had watched him sleep on that first night, completely, without looking away, taking in every detail like he was making sure he had it right. The ship climbed higher. The valley grew smaller. The clouds came up around it slowly, softening the edges, and then it was gone. Ash stayed at the viewport for a moment after it disappeared. Then he turned away from the glass and walked back across the cabin. He found his spot beside Cara's chair. He turned once, settled his wings, and curled down with his chin close to her armrest and his eyes drifting shut. His breathing slowed. His scales caught the soft light of the cabin. He looked, in every possible way, like something that had finally stopped waiting. Cara reached over without thinking and rested her hand gently on his side. He did not stir. He just breathed, slow and even, all the way up into the dark between the stars. He was home.